unleashing the largest economic sanctions in history, with details to be announced at 2:00 p.m. this afternoon. If successful, it will demonstrate unprecedented American global economic power. What exactly is going on? What can it rely on to succeed? Can it actually succeed? This is the first topic I'll be discussing with you all today. The second one is the breakdown of trade negotiations between the U.S. and Canada. Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau basically flipped the table and walked out, and as a result, Trump set the House of U.S.-Canada trade on fire today. So, what does this mean? What kind of consequences will it bring? And what about the impact on Canada? How will Trudeau respond? This move determines whether Canada's national destiny prospers or declines from here on out. That's no exaggeration. What is going on? That is also a topic I, Fang Wei, am bringing to you today. Alright, we now welcome you to listen to and watch Good Morning America, brought to you by Fang Wei. Hello to our YouTube audience, and hello to our listeners of Sound of Hope Silicon Valley FM 96.1. Alright, so next. Okay, let's get straight to the point. Trump tweeted this morning that Iran is collapsing completely. What does that mean? The background for this tweet is this. U.S. Treasury Secretary Bessent issued a warning today, warning Iran's allies. And who are they? We'll talk about that in a moment. It's all the friends who do business with them. The U.S. is preparing to cut off all of Tehran's economic ties with a wave of upcoming sanctions. Bessent published an article in the Financial Times and also posted on X, saying that this will be the largest coordinated economic isolation in human history. This is the largest financial offensive ever launched against an adversary. Bessent said the world should understand that our goal is to cut off every economic lifeline supporting this tyrannical regime until Tehran is completely isolated and helpless. And the United States will impose what are called secondary sanctions on all countries and entities that purchase Iranian oil, including all financial intermediaries, relevant banks, shipping, and free trade zones, as well as what are called currency exchange houses that handle Iranian transactions, layering these on top of the existing maritime blockade. To put it plainly, before it was about not letting Iran do business with the world, now it's about not letting countries that do business with Iran do business with the world. Of course, the Gulf Cooperation Council countries will be the first to bear the brunt of this, right? So they're expected to all cease their economic ties with Iran, and on top of that, all the other Arab countries as well. To reiterate, the essence of this matter, the reason these secondary sanctions can succeed, is that it will highlight the conflict between the United States and the CCP. In other words, once all countries around the world withdraw from doing business with Iran, when the tide goes out, who will be left standing there naked? It is expected to be just 2 or 3 countries. One is the CCP, one is Russia, and the other is North Korea. So will the CCP go head-to-head with the U.S. on this matter? This is, today, the most important thing to watch in the massive sanctions the U.S. has unleashed against Iran. Exactly what the U.S. will do regarding the CCP and how the CCP will respond. So the war between the U.S. and Iran has shifted from a military war to an economic war, and this is also a demonstration of the U.S. showcasing its unprecedented economic power. As for the details, they will be announced by Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, at 2:00 p.m. this afternoon. Let me give you a brief overview of the current situation. First, Iran's oil transport is now completely blockaded. Not a single ship can get out. Additionally, the export routes for non-Iranian crude oil from Gulf countries are being reopened. Last week, nearly 200 ships passed through the Strait of Hormuz and made it out smoothly, averaging 25 to 30 ships per day. We need to know that 2 weeks ago, the average was only 7 ships per day, which means it has increased by 400% within 2 weeks. As we all know, supertankers can each transport 2 million barrels of crude oil, so 5 of them can deliver 10 million barrels. So you could say that the transport of crude oil has now essentially been cleared. So today, Brent crude oil prices fell by 2% because Trump is about to impose the largest economic sanctions in history on Iran, and yet Brent crude actually dropped by nearly 2%. 2%, mind you, falling to $92, while West Texas Intermediate crude also fell by more than 2%. So the price of oil futures flowing out of the Gulf has dropped from $160 per barrel at the end of March to $97 as of last Friday. What does that mean? It means that the oil market doesn't expect oil prices to surge again, or at least not back up to $97. We know it's at $92 right now, you see. So with these not financial sanctions, but comprehensive economic sanctions, cutting off every lifeline, is Iran afraid or not? We'll have to see how they react. One of the 3 members of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, a 3-person group named Rizai, vowed that Iran would retaliate against any sanctions in an earthquake-level way. He warned that any country supporting the sanctions is committing an act of war against Iran. He said that if this economic war continues, not a single drop of oil will be exported, meaning it won't be exported through the Strait of Hormuz. But whether it's through the Strait of Hormuz or anywhere else in the Persian Gulf, Iran will consider any country's participation in and support for the U.S. economic war against the Iranian people as an act of war. So you can tell his reaction is extremely strong. And conversely, you can tell that what Besant said or did really hit him where it hurts. But the question is his strong reaction effective? Are the things he said effective? If he could do it, he certainly would have done it long ago. So let's first talk about what the current situation in Iran is really like. Let's start with their economic data. Yesterday, the Iranian currency hit a new record low, with $1 trading for 2 million rials. Back in March, it was trading at 1.5 million rials, which was already very, very bad. Now it's dropped further to 2 million rials, with inflation over 70%, and the price of beef in Iran has skyrocketed by 150%. Now the Iranian people are sighing that it's hard to make ends meet, and many people have already stopped eating meat. They can only afford to buy some vegetables and fruits. And now, just 3 months after the war broke out, over 1 million jobs in Iran have disappeared. The overall economy is projected by the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, to contract by 5.4% this year. And there is another very important factor, which is that the Iranian government currently has no US dollars, no hard currency. Now, Iranian President Pezeshkian stated just a couple of days ago that it would be best to end the war today, and that those who insist on war must be prepared to accept the consequences. And Parliament Speaker Jalibov said that if the people are starving and the system can't support them economically, then military power is meaningless. And Iran's founding leader was Khomeini, not Khamenei. Khamenei is the second. This was the first. Khomeini's grandson, Hassan Khomeini, publicly stated at a meeting of Pezeshkian's government officials that U.S. sanctions and the war have dealt a devastating blow to Iran, and the regime is being squeezed from all sides. He described the pressure as so heavy that it would be enough to topple 10 governments in the region. Yes, it would topple 10 governments. He cited a historical example from Islamic history, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, which refers to the temporary truce agreement that their prophet Muhammad reached with Mecca at the time. It was a delaying tactic, and in the end, it led to a strategic victory. The implication is that our current retreat is justified and we haven't lost face. Meanwhile, regarding another matter, the Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson said that they had not received an invitation to join the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, but there was a proposal to hold talks with these countries on regional security. This is about the news I mentioned last night regarding Pakistan, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia signing the Mecca Treaty, the Mecca Defense Treaty. It means that an attack on any one of these countries is equivalent to an attack on all 3. It's essentially like an Arab version of mini NATO Article 5 for the Arab world. Okay, so Indian media and Israeli media have been spreading rumors, well actually, we can call them rumors now, reporting that Iran has also been invited to join. If Iran were invited to join, that would be huge. Does that mean if the U.S. attacks Iran, it's the same as attacking those 3 countries? Would they all have to retaliate? So it's pretty hard to believe. The reason I'm sharing this news with y'all now is just to say it's just a rumor. The Iranian Foreign Ministry said that's not the case yet, and I believe it won't be the case either. Because regarding the signing of the Mecca Defense Treaty, Trump was very affirmative, saying it's a bold and important treaty. What he meant was, you're actually defending against Iran. If Iran attacks Saudi Arabia, it's the same as attacking Turkey or Pakistan. Alright, so now, as of today, the U.S. general targeting Iran is no longer 4-star General Keane, but Treasury Secretary Besant, or should I say the talented Besant, who has finally found a place to showcase his talents. I want to talk a bit about this guy Besant. He actually came from a poor background, though you can't entirely say that. He used to be very wealthy. His family was very wealthy. His father was a real estate developer who, due to excessive debt, in English this is called over-leverage, which means using borrowed money to operate. Well, that's exactly what Zhu Jiayan did. Because of that excessive debt, he lost the entire family fortune. The wealth his family had accumulated over several generations was completely wiped out. So he went from being rich to poor. When he was 9 years old, he started working. After his family's fortunes declined, he worked as a busboy in a cafeteria, clearing dishes and utensils. And on Ocean Drive, he set up beach chairs and umbrellas for people on the beach. So throughout his life, he has been extremely cautious about using leverage, and you can often see that he spots the financial weaknesses exposed by the excessive use of leverage. He later went to Yale University and graduated in 1984. He majored in political science. He didn't study economics or finance. He studied politics. During his time at school, he was the publisher of the Yale Daily News, which means he was a media person, and specifically held a role like editor-in-chief. Later, the year he graduated, he met someone at the Yale Career Center named Jim Rogers. Jim Rogers was a co-founder of Soros's fund, and that's how he got an internship opportunity at Soros's company. So notice that he didn't study finance, he studied political science and journalism and worked in media. Later, over the next 7 years, he worked at various financial firms in the United States. 7 years later, in 2000, he was recruited by Soros to join his fund management company, serving as the director of his London office. Then, in the following year, 1992, having joined in 1991, he participated in the attack on the British pound, shorting it. In this single move, the Soros fund weighed over $1 billion, and this was $1 billion in 1992, which effectively forced the pound out of the European exchange rate mechanism. So this is a very famous trade in history. Of course, the people who spearheaded this trade at the time were Soros's top advisor, Druckenmiller, and Soros himself. Besant was quite young at the time and was just a team member, not a decision maker, but he learned a great deal. That's why he is extremely vigilant about the use of leverage. He can often spot the financial weaknesses that countries or banks expose in this regard, which can then become targets for attack. He learned very quickly. Later, after working for Soros for 9 years, he was very successful and eventually set up his own firm. But his attempt to set up his own firm didn't go very smoothly. After that, in 2011, he was invited back by Soros to serve as Soros's chief investment officer. That was the highest investment position under Soros, and he was responsible for coordinating the investment decisions for the entire fund. The second year after he returned to take on the role of chief investment officer, he bet on Abenomics monetary easing, predicting it would cause the yen to depreciate significantly, and made $1.2 billion within 3 months. So during the second stint with Soros, he spent 4 years, and earned $10 billion for Soros. Then in 2015, he left again to found his own fund called Key Square Group. Soros gave him a $2 billion seed fund, which was the largest initial investment in the history of hedge funds, and that in itself was an endorsement of his capabilities. So what kind of approach does he take? He is a global macro trader. He doesn't pick stocks, he doesn't do quantitative analysis, he doesn't look at individual stocks, and he doesn't just stare at charts. Instead, he makes big bets based on his judgment of where a country's monetary and interest rate policies are headed. So his core competency has been described by his colleagues as the ability to see vulnerabilities that others can't. He's truly unique and a real talent. It shows that Trump hires without sticking to conventional patterns. There are 3 reasons why Trump shouldn't have hired him. Since leaving Soros in 2015, his fund has struggled. Some people excel working for others, but fail as bosses. When you're in charge, you manage everything, whereas employees just focus on their specific talents. When you're the boss, you have to handle every single aspect, all the nitty-gritty details, and a lot of people just aren't good at that. So that's the first point. But Trump didn't mind that at all. Second, he's a Soros guy, and American conservatives generally frown upon anyone associated with him. But he didn't have any personal relationship with Soros. It was purely a professional one. And third, he is openly gay, and, Trump didn't mind that either. He boldly appointed him. So he let him become the commander of this so-called economic war against Iran. It has now shifted to an economic war. So we'll have to see how this plays out. If it's successful, and I'll say this again, the core target of this economic war is the CCP, not Iran nor the Gulf states. It likely has nothing to do with the Arab nations either. They will all stand with the United States. But how they handle the CCP is the big thing to watch after 2 o'clock p.m. this afternoon. Let's see how it actually goes. Because a lot of times, fighting an economic war with the CCP is like trying to kill a rat without breaking the vase, right? Because the US and Chinese economies haven't decoupled yet, and they still have a grip on rare earth elements. If you hit the CCP too hard, they'll turn around and bite you back. What do you do then? That's the dilemma with this decision. All right, let's see what Besant actually brings to the table at 2 o'clock p.m. this afternoon. Let's do a quick poll here, shall we? Do you think Besant can pull off what he calls, and he's talking a big game here, the largest scale economic siege in history? He says we are going to leave Iran completely isolated and without any support. Are you optimistic, pessimistic, or just unsure? Shall we run a poll? All right, moving on. Let's talk about another piece of major news today. President Trump just tweeted that if the Canadian Prime Minister walks away from the table after the U.S.-Canada trade negotiations are finished, well, Trump just set the house on fire today. What's going on? Well, as it turns out, Trump just responded 2 hours ago. Basically, if you flip the table, he burns the house down. A significant part of the entire U.S.-Canada trade deal is going to be burned up. What's going on? Let's first talk about what fell apart last week. Everyone is actually asking for the reason, because wasn't everything fine on Wednesday? How did it suddenly fall apart? And Carney said it was a last-minute development, so everyone kept pressing to ask what that last-minute development was. So the U.S. Trade Representative, Lighthizer, he said our proposal to Canada was actually very good, which would lower auto tariffs to a minimum of 7%. Everyone, pay attention to this word. Remember this number, 7%. Cancel the 10% tariff on softwood lumber, further reduce softwood lumber tariffs, lower most Canadian steel tariffs to 25%, and suspend the 50% tariff imposed on Canadian dairy products and wine. Grier directly refuted Carney's claim, saying that the U.S. simply did not provide enough conditions or good enough conditions, saying that the U.S. has already been more favorable to Canada than to other allies. So why exactly did the talks fall apart? So Carney vaguely mentioned 2 points. One is that the U.S. is restricting Canada's ability to negotiate trade agreements with other countries. Second, it's restricting Canada's culture. What does that mean? So everyone kept pressing, and after asking back and forth about the first issue, they finally got an answer. Because I listened to Carney's press conference over and over again, N times, and I could tell, and these Western reporters certainly could tell too. What does that mean? It means that the U.S. wants us to stop importing Chinese steel and then re-exporting it to the U.S. But unless the steel, automotive, and U.S.-Canada markets are integrated, you can't restrict us from doing business with the CCP. If you don't integrate your market with ours, you can't restrict us. We have our freedom. That's his first point. Personally, I think, and I'm asking this objectively, since the U.S. is your supermarket, 75% to 80% of your market is the U.S., why can't your biggest customer set a condition? Carney's point is that this is an insult to our sovereignty. Since you won't form a completely unified market with me, you can't restrict me from doing business with others. To put it bluntly, that's the first point. The second point is culture. The U.S. is restricting our culture. The reporter kept asking, but to this day, I haven't seen him answer what this issue is. At least I haven't heard it. If anyone here has heard it and can explain or help fill in the details, please do. But my interpretation is definitely that it's about the CCP. The U.S. is restricting Canada from doing what you might call from engaging in any cultural cooperation with the CCP. So what am I trying to say? Is that with the U.S.-China standoff, the U.S. is demanding that its allies stand with them. Since you're doing business with us, you shouldn't do business with the CCP, because we are already in an adversarial relationship with them. Canada's response is, unless you treat me the same way you treat the U.S., I won't stand with you. I won't be on the same page as you unless you treat me completely like one of your own. This is the fundamental difference in the positions of the two sides. That's what I've gathered. What do you think? In business negotiations, can Canada actually do that? Can they treat the US like that? What does everyone think? Oh, I already talked about this news last night, and I've received quite a bit of feedback from viewers, so I'll read some of that feedback. These few pieces of feedback are all from Chinese Canadian viewers. One viewer named Lucky Peter said, we currently have the worst prime minister in history, and in the end, it's us Canadians who suffer. High taxes, the cost of living has skyrocketed, many businesses are closing down or moving to the US, massive unemployment, many families can't pay their mortgages, and so on and so forth. As the old saying goes, don't bite the hand that feeds you. Don't bite the hand that feeds you. He said, I don't agree with everything the prime minister has done to our country. All right, so Trump posted a tweet yesterday saying that wasn't even the best one. The best one is today's tweet. He posted a tweet today, 2 hours ago. I'll tell you what it is in a moment. So this President Trump's tweet from yesterday said this. He said Canada wants to be a state of the U.S., wants to enjoy the benefits of being a U.S. state, but doesn't want to be our state. They have also been charging our great farmers huge tariffs for years, and that's not going to fly anymore. What does that mean? For these Canadian, what's called U.S. imports into Canada, like dairy products and eggs and chicken and things like that, if it exceeds the quota Canada gives to the U.S., then the tax is 200 to 300% or even higher. Imposing such high tariffs basically blocks it completely. And for these dairy products, poultry, and eggs that Canada exports to the U.S., for anything exceeding the import quota, the U.S. only levies a tariff of a few dozen %. So this is a huge imbalance. So looking at the big picture, from what I've seen actually, if Trump isn't treating Canada well, it's not that Trump isn't treating Canada well. The trade terms he's offered Canada are already the best among all his allies. But here's the problem. I think the issue is that the current Trudeau government in Canada isn't on the same page as the U.S. Even after giving them the best terms, they still say, you can't force me to stand with you. I have the freedom to stand with the CCP. That's my sovereignty, and I'm going to do business with them. The question is, does Canada even have the leverage to do that? As a country with such a small economic scale and such a heavy reliance on the U.S., why does Carney think you can act as some kind of middle ground between China and the U.S.? Do you actually have that kind of power? So the chief market strategist at a Canadian investment bank, James Tuhan, said this the day before yesterday. He said, Trump is making deals while Carney is putting on a political show. Look at how much I'm defending Canada. Look at how nationalistic I am. So I didn't quite grasp that comment yesterday, but now I see it clearly. What he said really makes sense because Trump is negotiating a deal, but Carney is saying to defend our sovereignty and our right to choose, I'm not talking to you anymore. And he flips the table and walks away. Walking away like that sacrifices the interests of the Canadian people, doesn't it? So I don't know what you all think about this. Someone left a comment yesterday saying, what's the big deal? It's only 5% of trade. Besides, the bulk of trade between Canada and the U.S. is covered by the USMCA, which is tariff-free. But I'm saying that's not how it works. This 5% of business is about attitude. If the attitude's wrong, if things get heated, this 5% could very quickly expand to the 92% covered by the USMCA. That could happen in a heartbeat. And sure enough, it happened today. Trump, he sent out a tweet today, this morning at 9 o'clock. At 10 o'clock, he sent out a tweet. Trump said, Canada has been ripping off the United States for years, charging our farmers and agricultural products ridiculously high tariffs. That's the 200 to 300% I was just talking about. Making life impossible for these great American patriots and has long caused a $60 billion trade deficit between our countries. This is unsustainable, and it will not continue any longer. Starting January 1st of next year, all tariffs on cars, trucks, auto parts, and steel will be raised to 50%. Only products made in the United States will be tariff-free. Canada will no longer be treated as a state. Then President Trump continued, on trade and other matters, they are one of the most difficult countries in the world to deal with. They feel like they're entitled to everything. But we don't need Canada. It's them who need us. 95% of their business is done with the United States, while for us, it's the exact opposite. All right, how should we interpret this tweet? Let me break it down. So the deal that Carney flipped the table over, right? It's $20 billion. This $20 billion, President Trump is us. This is called invoking Section 338 of a 1930 Tariff Act. We'll just call it Section 338. According to the provisions of Section 338, it covers 554 types of goods between the U.S. and Canada, so it's about $20 billion U.S. dollars. What kind of things are they, roughly? Well, it's dairy products, agricultural products, alcohol, lumber, paper, hockey equipment, and things like that. As for the steel and aluminum tariffs, steel, aluminum, and auto parts were not part of the negotiations everyone was discussing last week. They're covered by a different provision, Section 232. So each issue is handled separately. What was discussed last week was the Section 338 matter. So what does 232 cover then? It covers cars, trucks, parts, and steel and aluminum, which is exactly what President Trump just mentioned. Currently, cars, trucks, and parts are all at 25%, while steel and aluminum are at 50%. All right, so what does this latest tweet from Trump mean? He has a direct quote in there. He says, "Building the U.S." And then there are zero tariffs. Canada will be treated like a state no longer. The original meaning, translated into Chinese, is that only manufacturing in the U.S. qualifies for zero tariffs, and Canada will no longer be treated like a state. We need to explain the meaning behind this statement so everyone can understand. As everyone knows, under the so-called U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, for vehicles that meet the rules of origin of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, that is to say, vehicles manufactured in these three North American countries, the U.S. only imposes tariffs on the non-U.S. components. For example, if a car assembled in Ontario, Canada, is to be sold in the U.S. and 60% of its parts are American-made, then only the remaining 40% will be subject to tariffs, and the current tariff rate is 25%. I hope everyone understands that. To put it simply, the value of this car is 10%, so a 10% tariff is levied, which is just 25% multiplied by 40%. But what Trump just meant by that is that from now on, after January 1st next year, that 60% exemption is gone. Canada, 100% of the value of what you produce will be subject to tariffs, and the tariff level is 50%. In other words, 100% multiplied by 50% is 50%, right? In other words, the tariff on all cars will rise from 10% to 50%. As you all know, in North America, the automotive supply chain involves parts moving back and forth between the U.S. and Canada, crossing the border 6 to 8 times before a vehicle is fully assembled. Because in those provinces in Canada and the northern states in the U.S., there's basically no concept of a border. You just go wherever it's convenient, and you get the work done wherever it's cheaper. So this car goes back and forth however many times, and when it's finally finished, it's as if it were all one country. So Trump's measure means that for the same batch of parts, not only will they be taxed in full, but they will be taxed repeatedly. You take it to Canada once, bring it back, I'll tax it once. After it's processed and sent over, when it comes back, I'll tax it again. So this statement from Trump isn't just about raising it from 10% to 50%. It's going to be multiplied by 6 or 7. So in essence, this dismantles the entire foundation of Canada's automotive manufacturing for the U.S. From now on, Canada shouldn't even bother making cars for the U.S. anymore. It's that serious. Of course, Canada would argue that doing this violates the USMCA trade agreement. But first of all, this trade agreement is currently under negotiation. Secondly, Trump says he'll find a way, including the $20 billion mentioned earlier. Trump dug up Section 338 from the 1930 Tariff Act, a clause that hasn't been used in 94 years. It was brought out and used once back then and hasn't been used since. If Trump can dig that up, he'll find a way. All right, so let's assume Trump's threat is real and can be implemented. How wide would the impact be? Canada sells over $50 billion worth of cars to the U.S. every year. Wait, let me correct that. Canada's entire automotive industry generates over $50 billion in business, with 93% exported to the U.S., involving 700,000 jobs. You know, for a family of 4, 700,000 jobs means 3 million people, which is equivalent to 7.5% of Canada's population. So if Carney flips the table, Trump would effectively destroy the entire U.S.-Canada automotive manufacturing industry. That's why I call it Trump setting the house on fire. So what would Carney do then? One option is to realize the severity of the situation and yield. The second is to firmly and resolutely refuse to follow the U.S. What do you all think Carney will choose? So his choice really determines whether Canada's national destiny will rise or fall. I'm really not exaggerating. He simply can't afford to go head-to-head with the U.S., yet he still wants to do it. That's why Deng Xiaoping said back in 1979 that those who followed the U.S. got rich, while those who followed the Soviet Union became poor. Canada's right next to the U.S. now. If they don't follow the U.S., how do you see this situation? So, shall we do another poll? Especially for our Canadian viewers. What do you think Carney will do? It's like Trump applying 10 times the pressure. Will Carney yield? Will he change his tune? Or will Carney stand firm again, saying, I absolutely won't align with you, the U.S., and I'll just pivot directly to the CCP? Should we run a poll? Let's see what he'll actually do. What do you think he'll do? I'm also very curious to know everyone's thoughts. It really is a huge change for the whole world. I hope everything turns out for the better. Canada and the United States are truly brother nations. They share the same language, culture, and origins with deep historical ties. They are close neighbors, like brothers, and it's unfortunate things have turned this way. I hope that after this spat, they can settle things like brothers do and remain close. This now depends on Carney.